It's great to be here speaking at Google Think again. I wanted to talk to you today about the future. That's what we do at Google Think, right? But I wanted to take a different approach to this. That is, when we normally have these discussions about the future, we make these predictions. But we've been making predictions about the future for about as long as time has existed, okay? And sometimes what we don't do is we don't go back and look at the predictions we've made in the past to see whether they were correct. So if we take what's happening at Google right now, there's a lot of interesting things happening in Google. We're talking a lot about self-driving cars as an example. Now this is going to be pretty cool, self-driving cars. But one of the things we probably haven't anticipated is not actually just how the car is going to work, but how this is going to change our behavior, how we're going to adapt to a world where we no longer have to drive a car. What are we going to do in the car? We're going to update our Facebook status and watch movies? Probably, right? Or maybe work. So part of the predictions of the future, where sometimes we make mistakes or we come short, is we don't anticipate some of the behavioral changes that come out of that. So this is a very interesting area to look at. Certainly interests me. Now, of late, there's been some interesting changes, some interesting disruptions. One of those is Uber, and I'm sure you guys have heard of Uber. These are some protests occurring in Milano, in Italy. We've had protests around the world in London, in Barcelona. All over the world, people have been protesting, mainly taxi drivers protesting this. They were protesting in London, and it was very, very interesting. The day they had a taxi strike for Uber in London, Uber had a 700% increase in downloads of their app. I don't think that's what Uber, the London cabbies, intended when they had the taxi strike. But you see, the taxi drivers in London, they thought Uber was about, or they thought taxis was about getting from point A to point B. But Uber taught us that this experience that they built around the mobile, around the app, was something different. It was the experience of Uber that changed it. Now, this is not just about getting from point A to point B. There's a lot of nuances here. If you're trying to wait for a taxi, and you've booked a taxi and the taxi's running late, especially in Sao Paulo with the traffic, you're sitting there, you're waiting, you're getting anxious. But if you've got your phone and you can pull it out and see where the taxi is, the stress level goes down. You're relaxing. You now know the car is on the way. The uncertainty disappears. So this is part of the experience that Uber really differentiated on. The other element, of course, is the payment. There's no swipe, there's no tap. You just get out of the car and pay. Now, it's interesting. Back in 2005, Microsoft did this video on the future of banking. And embedded in this was a payment scenario getting out of a taxi. So back in 2005, Microsoft predicted this scenario where we would pay with our phone. What they didn't predict was that the disruption of the smartphone would disrupt taxi business itself. They didn't see that coming. They saw the payment innovation coming, but they didn't see disruption of taxis. So how much of this, when we predict the future, how many of these changes do we see coming, but how many of them do we miss? That's really interesting thing to look at. So when we look back at these predictions that we made in the past, this is from a concept phone from around 2005. And you may have seen Nokia Morph and other phones that they put out there. We thought that smartphones of the future would be like mini computers that we would carry around with us. So the focus was on that functionality of these devices. And we weren't wrong. We carry around extremely powerful computers in our pockets these days. In fact, back in 1985, Bank of America had 7 IBM 3033 mainframes, which did about 40 gigaflops of processing speed for Bank of America in their San Francisco data center. Today, in the smartphones that we carry around, the most powerful smartphones we have, with the Snapdragon 805 processors and the Samsung quad-core processors, they're 30 times more powerful than that stack of technology that Bank of America had just in 1985. That's incredible. So we are carrying around these incredibly powerful supercomputers in our pocket. What do we do with these incredibly powerful supercomputers? Well, we play Flappy Bird and Angry Bird and update our Facebook status, right? So this is a behavior that we didn't see coming. We thought, what did we think we would be doing with these devices? Well, we thought we'd be, sharing, not necessarily sharing content, but consuming content. We'd be listening to music, watching movies, and then if we were late, we remember we forgot our wife's anniversary, and we have to order our wife some flowers online, and we're getting on our phone and ordering flowers. This is the sort of videos you would see 10 years ago of the future of smartphone technologies. It was all about the hardware form factor, and it was about consumption. What we didn't see coming was content creation. This has exploded through the use of smartphones. You know, we see things like Vine and Instagram and other technologies, YouTube, people sharing huge amounts of content. We just didn't anticipate this 10 years ago when we saw these predictions of the future. This is something really interesting. This is something different. Because this has had a profound impact on the architecture of the internet and the way we use the internet. By 2017, 2/3 of all data that passes across mobile networks will be video. And probably 10% of that's still going to be selfies, right? But we pass this immense amount of data. Now, this has created some really interesting outlier things that we didn't anticipate. For example, about 10% of all photos in existence were taken in the last 60 days. That's a pretty incredible statistic, isn't it? Because we've got this exponential increase in the use of the smartphone as a video and content creation platform. But it's also created some astounding data facts. In 2008, we anticipated we would do about 1 zettabyte of content across the internet. This year, we're going to do 9 zettabytes of content. Does that sound like a lot of data? You know what a zettabyte is? You got gigabyte, terabyte. What comes after that? Petabyte, exabyte, and then zettabyte, right? Don't worry, you don't have to remember this. I'm not going to test you on this later, right? After zettabyte comes a yottabyte, named after Yoda, the character out of Star Wars. But anyway, let's get focused. So 9 zettabytes of content. That's 9 times what we estimated back in 2008 because we didn't see the content creation element coming. Now, to put this in perspective, 9 zettabytes of content, how much is that? If you take every book, every magazine, every newspaper we've ever printed throughout history, we generate that same amount of content today 200,000 times every second of every day. That's incredible. We didn't see that coming. Now, we thought the internet would create an explosion of content and data, but we thought it would be about consumption, not about sharing. This is where our lives have changed with social and so forth. It's created stars like this. This is PewDiePie. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard of PewDiePie. He is the #1 YouTube blogger on the planet today. As you can see, he has 5 billion views on his YouTube channel. He gets 300 million views a month. Now, to put that in perspective, he does about the same amount of traffic in 3 months that we got for the entire World Cup this year, 1 billion views. He does that in 3 months, and he does it over and over and over again. Incredible. To put this in perspective, if you take the likes of CNN or Justin Bieber and Miley Cyrus, they're not even close to PewDiePie. He does twice the traffic of Miley Cyrus and Justin Bieber combined, and he does 20 times the traffic of CNN. CNN has a budget of $860 million a year to produce their news network. My guess is PewDiePie probably has a slightly lower budget than CNN. So we didn't see this coming. We didn't see this element of these new stars. Back when I was growing up at high school and when I first started working, MTV was where the stars came from, right? Now it's things like YouTube and Vine, these sorts of things. This is a Viner. Her name is Lauren Giraldo. And she gets paid $25,000 US to produce a 6-second Vine video. That's pretty incredible. Why? In the category of 13 to 17-year-old teenage girls, she is 50 times more influential for purchase decisions than Vogue magazine. She's 25 times more powerful as a brand for purchase decision in that age bracket than Victoria's Secret. Now do you know why she gets paid $25,000 to do a 6-second video? So here's the question. With people like PewDiePie and Lauren Giraldo, how do brands get influence today? Well, it's not through traditional media. It's not through advertising on television or newspaper or billboards anymore. These things just aren't working to create influence and awareness anymore. How do you get someone like Lauren Giraldo or PewDiePie to talk about banking and finance? You probably can't. So that's a real issue for us as bankers. How are we going to capture the interest of this new generation? You see, the generation of the baby boomers, the Gen X, they're the touch and the feel generation. We saw in the last presentation a lot of discussion about the branch, okay? But we used to feel like it's not real unless there was bricks and mortar. It's not real unless we could go down to that store and try on those clothes and those shoes. I'm never going to buy shoes off the internet. But the Gen Ys, the millennials, they're the see and the hear generation. Unless they've seen it on YouTube and heard about it through social networks, the brand is not relevant. The influence has shifted. We didn't see that coming. So what about when we think about banking? Well, we have to put this in context. You see, when we think about what happens next, the smartphone is just the start. We've got a whole stream of consciousness that's coming. Data elements and real-time contextuality that's coming through smart devices like smartphones and so forth, that's further going to change the way we think about brands, the way we're influenced, the way we share, the way we connect. The smartphone was just the start. In fact, when we look at things like Google Glass and the Google Contact Lens coming in the future, we understand that actually this is more about our world being augmented. This data is starting to inform us in different ways. In fact, that data is starting to look a lot like advice, something that can help us make decisions day to day. It's no longer about interactivity or usability. It's now becoming about how we perceive the world and how this changes our thinking. Let me illustrate the element of how this data is incredible in terms of its capability. This device here is called a Vessel. You can see it, it's a startup based out of US right now. You can pour a drink into this cup and it will tell you what is the drink inside your cup. And it will tell you how many calories that drink has. It can even differentiate between different types of Starbucks coffee. And the device on the right is called a SIO. This is a spectrometer. You link it with your smartphone, with your Android or your iOS smartphone, and you wave it over the meal in front of you, and it will tell you how many calories are in the meal that you're about to eat. Now, this is changing the way we perceive the world, these sensors and data. But it's more than that. We're going to be capturing this information and starting to apply it to ourselves personally. Let me illustrate this unique shift. This fridge here is a smart fridge. It's so smart that it can tell what is being stored in the fridge and recommend the healthiest recipe you can make from the remaining ingredients you've got in the fridge. Now, this is intelligence, but it's also advice. So these things around us are no longer just giving us data, they're giving us awareness, they're giving us advice. And in the past, we used to think that in respect to finance and banking, that you needed to see someone face to face to get advice, and that a human was always going to be better at giving you advice than a computer. But this is changing the dynamic. Let me illustrate it. In Japan at the moment, in fact, worldwide, there is a Japanese pop star. Some of you may have heard of her. Her name is Miku, Hatsune Miku. Miku is a Japanese word for future. And Miku has come to the fore recently, in recent times in Japan, through crowd-sharing technology. Basically, something a little different about this pop star. She's opening for Lady Gaga right now in the United States, so she must be pretty popular, right?